Guess what happens when you write up your best employee after he came in to help on his day off? Not my story, but recently happened to a friend of mine. Personal details omitted, obviously. My buddy Steve has worked at a small business for over 10 years. Most of his time there has been pretty alright, but recently it's become a remarkably worse place to work. Steve is the most senior employee outside of management and by far the most productive. He's always training new hires, working extra hours, helping other departments, you name it. Pretty often, Steve will come in for a couple hours on his day off to take care of backed-up paperwork and general housekeeping of his department. This does wonders for keeping his department running smoothly, especially when they're busy. Management knows about this and approves. Going into the holidays this year, they are absolutely slammed, as usual. Orders are backing up, and it's all hands on deck. Extra hours, full tilt. After another 60-hour work week, Steve has a couple days off. On a second day off, he decides to go into work for a few hours. He knows his coworkers are likely too busy to be taking care of the side stuff, so he's being a team player and helping out. While he's finishing up and about to leave, Steve's manager comes up to him and has the following conversation with him. "Hey, Steve, quit messing around. Get back out there and do your job." Steve replies, "Hey, manager, sorry, it's my day off. I'm not scheduled to work this shift. I'm just helping out. Leaving in like 5 minutes." Manager replies, "The hell you are. Get your ass out there." "No, not happening. I'm going home." The next day, Steve is predictably brought into the office, dressed down, and written up for insubordination. But there's a few things about Steve that you should know, that his employers knew but either forgot or didn't care about. Steve was getting fed up with his employer for a while now. Steve is quite financially stable as he works in a high-demand industry, and his wife also has a fantastic, well-paying job. Steve's about to become a dad. In fact, he's very, very close to becoming a dad, right after the holidays, most likely. So, Steve is in the manager's office, just finished getting talked down to, and handed his write-up to sign. Steve signs his write-up, hands it back, along with an envelope with a short letter inside. "What's this?" Manager asks. "My 2-week notice." Cue the backpedaling. Manager is apologetic, asks for Steve to at least finish the holiday rush. Big boss comes in and offers a raise if he stays, the whole shebang. Steve turns it all down. Now Steve's former employer has to get through the holidays without their most reliable worker, which will take at least 2 or 3 new hires to cover. Meanwhile, Steve can enjoy the holidays without stress, help prepare for the arrival of their baby, and start looking for work again when they're good and ready. Want my girlfriend? Threaten me? Take my whole shitty life. I had a girlfriend, and we were really bad for each other, and unsurprisingly, she was cheating on me. I found out in a rather dramatic way and had a full-on mental breakdown. Dude who she was cheating with had been fed a bunch of lies to keep him from talking to me or started threatening me with violence. Long story short, we broke up, she moved out of our place and into his place, and I started therapy. A few months go by and I realized in therapy that I wasn't just busted up about my ex-girlfriend, but also my whole life. I decided to find a new job, a new place to live, everything. Got the ball rolling, and the day I got my new job offer, I saw an email come into our jobs at inbox at the company I was working for. I recognized the name as the guy who was threatening me, and now living with my cheating ex. So I referred him to my boss. Talked to him about how he was great, I'd heard only good things, and hey, because I was putting in my 2 weeks, they should definitely hire him. Dude comes in for an interview. I'm on the panel. When we're shown in the room together, alone, he's like, "Dude, I'm sorry, bro, for all the things I said. Thank you so much for helping me out." I say, "No sweat. She always had good things to say about you, and I know that she was a good picker. After all, she chose both of us." And we chuckled like polite people. He actually does okay in the interview and gets the job. That job was a shit show. I'm not exaggerating when I say that it is the worst job I ever had. That place that I was moving to was paying twice for a third of the work. I was so relieved to be leaving. When I moved out of my place a month later, my landlord asked me if I knew anyone who was looking. Gave her the guy's phone number. The apartment was charming as fuck when you first see it, but was similarly absolute trash. But you didn't know that until you were living there. My buddy from my old job told me that he got the call for it at work and jumped on it. So I knew he had my old shitty job, my old shitty place, and my old shitty cheating girlfriend. Little sister calling me a parasitic leech. Enjoy the Amish lifestyle. I'm 28 years old and I live in a town with an inflation crisis. I moved back in with my parents since we have a good relationship. I buy all the groceries and I pay the electric bill. My little sister, 16, however, was not happy. She was saying that I should be a man and move out again. A few weeks ago, she started continuously calling me a freeloader and a parasitic leech. My parents are anti-tech. They are not part of any cult. They just avoid tech and prefer to live a simple life. The only modern tech they use is a laundry machine, a car, a flip phone, and a TV. Our parents don't, however, take away our gadgets if we paid for it ourselves. When I turned 18 and looked for my first job, I had to handwrite a resume since I didn't have a computer or a printer. It's hard to get a job while still in school because of the poor job market in our town. My little sister was lucky. I bought her a smartphone with a data plan since she was a young child, and yet she was continuously calling me these names. Eventually, my little sister's constant name-calling got on my nerves, and I came up with an idea. As the smartphone is under an active installment plan, I simply repossessed the smartphone. Now she's having the same childhood I had. Oh, and she stopped with the name-calling. Enjoy the Amish lifestyle, little sis. Neighbors use my property as their own. Paid for a new fence. I recently bought a house, and I have been having some work done before I move in. It was empty on the market for about 6 or 8 months before I bought it. One morning, I got a call from my contractor, asking me about moving the cars in the driveway. And of course, I had no idea what he was talking about. I hadn't moved in yet. I left my job site and drove nearly a half an hour to get there. As soon as I arrived, the people on the east side of me were walking toward the cars. I asked if they were their cars, and they said yes. They told me that they had been parking there for a few months with permission from the owners. I informed them that I was the new owner and they can't park there anymore. We went back and forth, and with the intention of being a good neighbor and trying to show some goodwill, I allowed them to park there for a few more weeks until I move in, with the agreement that they would move them by 6 a.m. every morning. The rest of the week went by without incident. The contractor called me about scheduling a walkthrough on Saturday, and we set time for early afternoon. When I arrived, there were 4 cars in the driveway and nowhere to park. The only on-street parking is 2 blocks away. I called them and asked them to move their vehicles, reminding them of our agreement. After 20 minutes, they finally came out and moved them. Speaking with them, they claimed to have misunderstood and thought our agreement only referred to weekdays and not weekends. I corrected them and moved on. Sunday morning, I grabbed the trailer and loaded some furniture to take over and store in the garage. Once again, there were cars in the driveway. I called them and got VM. I texted and said that they had until a tow truck could arrive to get them moved. No answer. I called the tow company. 45 minutes later, 2 tow trucks showed up, backed in and hooked up to the cars. All of a sudden, the neighbors were home. They ran out to stop their cars from being towed, and it ended up costing them a little over $300 to get them unhooked. I called the contractor and asked if they knew someone who could put in a driveway gate, and he did. I let the neighbors know that they could no longer use my driveway. On Wednesday, I get a call from the gate installer telling me that there are cars in the driveway. I called them, and tow trucks were on the way. They moved. The gate was installed, and I went by to pick up the opener that evening. The neighbor husband came out to confront me, and I opted to just call the PD and deal with it legally. That Saturday, I went by to accept an outdoor furniture delivery, and I checked on things where I noticed a towel beside the pool and a small kid's flotation device. My initial thought was that I just hadn't noticed it before, so I wrote it off and threw them both in the trash. On Saturday, the movers arrived with everything, and we began moving things in. About 7 p.m., my daughter and I left to go grab some dinner, arriving back at the house around 9:30 p.m. The neighbors were in my pool. They were hanging out and using my furniture. When I opened the door and began raising hell, they told the kids to go to the house, and the children ran to a corner of our fence and just walked through. They had cut out the privacy fence so it could be removed, and had been using the pool at their leisure for who knows how long. Again, I called the police and filed a complaint. The dad was arrested for trespassing, DPP, and an outstanding warrant, and the oldest boy, 20, also for an outstanding warrant. I replaced the fence with a new one because they had destroyed the posts, runners, and pickets by removing and reinstalling the panel. Small claims awarded me with the total cost of 83 of 8-foot privacy fence, which came out to $3,800. The following Monday morning around 5 a.m., their cars were parked in the street, where there is no street parking. So I made a phone call. They were gone when I left at 7 a.m. I haven't been paid yet, but I did notice the for rent sign in their yard this morning, so that is just as good. Good riddance. You say dogs barking is just what dogs do, huh? I had a neighbor that had a dog that, I shit you not, barked from about 7 p.m. till 5 a.m. non-stop. They worked nights, I think, so they kept it outside. And I knocked numerous times, and they said, "Dogs bark, what do you expect?" Their house was directly behind mine. We shared a divided wall. I recorded their dog for a full day. The minute they brought him in and felt like they were sleeping, I popped my phone into the dock and played it on my stereo full blast facing their yard at 9 a.m. They came over raving mad to my wall by about 12, asking me to shut my dog up. I said, "It's your dog. I recorded him, since you miss out on what dogs do. I'm just playing the radio at normal allowable city time, and I will do this every day." I started bringing the dog in at night after that. Don't want to wait your turn? Now you wait 10 minutes. On mobile, forgive my text wall. This happened to me last night. I got in my car to pick up my girlfriend, and my tire pressure light came on. I have a 12-volt air compressor in my back seat, but it's loud and fills sorta slowly, so I opted to drive to my local Wawa. For those of you that don't have a Wawa, it's like if 7-Eleven got sober and went to college. Wawa's air pumps are free to use, which usually means there are at least a few cars lined up. But when I pulled up, there was only one other car. Score! So I pulled behind the guy, filling his tires, and an older gentleman in a BMW pulled in behind me. After about 3 minutes, a woman in a brand new Lexus pulls up directly next to me and pulls her window down. "I only have to fill one tire. Do you mind if I go in front of you?" she asked. I said, "Actually, I do. We've been waiting here for a little bit. Sorry." She muttered something while rolling her window up, and I put mine up. About a minute later, the guy at the pump was done. So he backs up, and before I can even put my car in gear, Lexus woman pulls her car in front of mine, diagonally, blocking me from pulling into the spot, and then pulls straight in after the first guy has moved. She climbs out of her car and gives me the most infuriating little wave. By this point, my anger gives into a ninja-like calm, and I know exactly what must be done. I pull my car forward and stop about 6 inches from her rear bumper. The air pump is in the corner of the lot, so Lexus woman has a curb in front of her, curb to her right, where the pump is, and an open spot to her left. And now, my dirty-ass car right behind her brand new one. She's busy filling her tire and doesn't notice that I pulled up right behind her car. I step out of my car, grab my air compressor from my back seat, and start setting it up to fill up my tire. Mr. BMW, who has remained completely still and silent, sees what I'm doing and asks if I could fill his tires too. I say, "Of course," and motion for him to park in the empty spot to Lexus lady's left. As soon as he pulls in, she notices what's happening and starts yelling. I flip my air compressor and begin filling my tire. Her cries drowned out by the sound of 250 psi of justice. She comes and stands in front of me, face beet red and little flecks of spittle popping out between her cigarette teeth as she calls me all sorts of names. I calmly say, "Ma'am, I only have one tire to fill. You don't mind, do you?" Mr. BMW is absolutely loving this, and as I finish my tire and move on to fill his, she starts up again. "You motherfuckers, fucking piece of shit, assholes," etc. I finish Mr. BMW's tire, and he thanks me for my help, climbs in his car, and pulls away grinning. I wrap my compressor up nicely, pick a good song, and set my climate control to a balmy 82 degrees. All while Lexus lady is trapped in front of me. I calmly back up, give her a little wave, and drive off into the night. Airbnb host left me an unfair review, and it cost them hundreds. I recently attended a friend's wedding a few hours away from home, and the girlfriend and I decided to get an Airbnb so she could bring her dog. We found a nice place that allowed pets, took off early from work, and arrived Friday late afternoon. About 30 minutes later, the owner shows up to see how we're doing, while we have the dog on the porch. We make some small talk, and he mentions that we didn't indicate we were bringing a dog. I felt bad, as it was an honest mistake, and I'd never lied to somebody to get out of paying the pet fee. We tell him that, and offer to pay the $25 fee on the spot. He refuses to take the money, and says that he loves dogs, and eventually heads out. We didn't think too much about it, but then when we leave, we decide to give the place a much more thorough cleaning than was in the instructions. The dog didn't chew on any furniture or leave any other damage or mess, at least that we didn't clean up. In our minds, the trip was a success, and the Airbnb was a great fit. I got the email for them to leave a review, and I left a 5-star review and said that the house and the owner were great. But then I saw his review of me, and a private message where he blasted me for not telling him that I was bringing a dog. How dogs cause them so much more work, and how we shouldn't leave dogs alone in the house. That didn't sit well with me at all, since I thought we had handled this person to person when he came by on the first day. I was, and still am, happy to pay the pet fee, and there was no indication anywhere on the posting that we couldn't leave the dog alone for a few hours while we were at a wedding, nor did he say that while we chatted and told him that we were here for a wedding. For him to post that on my Airbnb profile felt like a cheap shot. I responded to him in the chat and said as much, and while Airbnb couldn't do anything about the review since it didn't violate any of their policies, my girlfriend did point out that hosts aren't supposed to show up to the property unannounced. I had no idea, and figured that was his property and he's allowed to show up, at least to check in with the guests. Normally I wouldn't care, especially since it was a very cordial interaction, but since he took a cheap shot with my review, I decided to do the same. I reached out to Airbnb support to tell them about his unannounced visit, and they forwarded it to their security team. I answered a few questions about the interaction, and they spoke to him. A week or so later, they let me know that he was in violation of their policy, and they refunded me 2 out of the 3 days of the stay, which came out to about $200, all because of a bad review. My grandma deeded money in her will, so I don't know the full story, but I do know the gist of it. My grandma raised her kids with love. She practically spoiled them, and she raised her grandkids too, me and my two sisters. Two of them, my uncle and my dad, became addicts, and the last, my aunt, became estranged. I've got tons of relatives, so I don't know if I've ever met her, and if I have, I don't remember her face or her name, so let's just call her Miss J. J left without looking back and constantly asked my grandmother for money. She hardly repaid Grandma, which was a big mistake because, surprise, surprise, my grandma was on top of every penny that she had. She was the best I've ever seen when it came to handling funds. But 2 years ago, my grandma was diagnosed with cancer. She worked her butt off her whole life. She was the strongest woman on the planet, and nobody got by without paying her their dues. Eventually, my grandma dies. In her will, she gives money to my grandpa, my dad, my uncle, me, and my sisters, everyone in her family. But when it comes to Jay, she says, "You still owe me $14. I don't know if she actually somehow deeded $14 to Jay in a will or just put it in there as a little slap in the face. All Jay was worried about when Grandma died was the money, and she got none of it. I couldn't be prouder to have a grandma that wouldn't leave this world without the last laugh. Edit, I guess I forgot to include it. Jay is also a drug addict. That's why she needed my grandmother's money constantly. My grandmother was a great woman and a great mother to me. She raised me well. And another edit, because so many people want to blame my grandmother. She raised 3 kids that were hers and 3 kids that weren't. Were hers turned into drug addicts. The 3 kids that weren't turned into people who could handle their emotions and found therapy for themselves. I think it was a generational problem rather than the bad parenting she's being accused of. She was the kindest woman I had ever met, but also the strongest. All 3 of us are getting therapy for things that aren't related to my grandmother. My uncle, my dad, and my aunt are not. Do we not think that maybe the generational differences of people who were often not given needed resources and people with the technology to find needed resources might be a factor in how they handle their mental illnesses? Last edit, and I'm not replying to anyone. I should have expected this of the Reddit community, notorious for being snobby and pompous, would react like this. But I feel the need to still clarify. None of you know my life simply from the paragraphs written here. I have a long history, and the memories of my grandmother are the only good ones I have. None of the drug addicts in my family, not my mom, not my dad, not my other grandma, not the aunt I do know, not my uncle, not one member of my family has spoken ill about how my grandmother treated her kids. In fact, they've spoken highly of her parenting. It'll be a cold day in hell when I let chronically online know-it-alls attempt to change my memory of my grandmother into something she was not. She was an honorable woman, and she is not responsible for the mistakes her children made when faced with an opioid crisis. I know that my dad was long out of the house before he got hooked on drugs, and he's now diagnosed with anxiety. If you'd like to continue blaming my grandma, I would love to see how you believe she affected the other half of my family who is the same way. A leading cause of addiction is genetics and mental and emotional disorders. Anxiety can be an inherited condition that probably went untreated, as my grandmother was also a very anxious person. What I know is my grandmother did not work her ass off to be a good person just for a bunch of self-important pigs to insult her. Bottom line, you don't know my life, I do. This was a funny story because everyone in my family knows Jay is an asshole. I planted bamboo that overrun my neighbor's property over a security light. About 4 years ago, I used to live in a nice HOA in a small town in Texas and enjoyed having only one neighbor over my backyard fence. The plot was about 2 acres, and the other side of the backyard butted up to a hayfield. The stars were beautiful at night because virtually no light pollution was there. Until my neighbor decided to install an incredibly bright security light over their back porch aimed directly onto my back patio and bedroom windows. I tried to ignore it at first and put shades in the bedroom, but out on the patio it was like having a bright LED headlight in your face all night. I consulted the HOA about adding a privacy addition to my fences to increase its height, but they said no, because it's already at the 8-foot max allowed height. They said that there was nothing in the bylaws or whatever about bright lights, so nothing they could do. Diplomacy. So I hated for this to be the thing where we finally had a formal greeting after 3 years of back porch waves, but I walked over and rang the doorbell with $20. I politely explained how the light was causing the aforementioned nuisance and asked if there was any way I could convince him to point the light down or in a different direction, and even offered to buy him a case of beer, the $20. And that was out of goodwill, and even a new motion sensing light. He seemed nice and agreed to point it down, but after waiting for a month, nothing changed. I went back to have another polite conversation. He said that he had changed his mind and he was going to leave it on every night and leave it pointed as is. Petty revenge. Needless to say, I was a bit upset diplomacy failed and started figuring out how to win. If the military taught me anything, that there's always ways to adapt and overcome. So I started researching fast-growing plants to create big privacy walls and reading through the HOA bylaws and city/state ordinances about what I could or couldn't plant if there were any repercussions for encroachment across the property line. I quickly discovered running bamboo, despite being very invasive, would grow super fast to make the neighbor's house and light disappear from view, and there was nothing on the HOA/state/city books to prevent me from planting it or cause legal recourse if it spread and grew on his side of the fence. The only thing he could do is cut anything that grew on his side of the line. So I pulled the trigger and planted a bunch of golden bamboo, which grows and spreads crazy fast in Texas and grows up to 20 feet tall. I didn't care if it took over the fence line because his house was 15 feet away from the fence while mine was 50 yards away. So I planted a bunch right against the fence and only put root barrier on my side to prevent it spreading into my yard. Within 6 months, his house and light were gone from my view, replaced by a pretty bamboo jungle row at the edge of my yard. Within 1 year, he complained it was growing into his yard via mailed letters that went right into the trash with no response. He rang my doorbell once and I looked at him through the window but just didn't answer the door. I unexpectedly sold the house and moved 2 years after planting for a career opportunity. It's been 2 years since I sold and I just checked the property on Google Earth and his entire backyard is bamboo.